session, parties and counsel are present, or members of our jury and our alternates are present. Our witnesses back on the witness stand. Mr. William, you may continue your examination.
Thank you. Ms. Jarvis, I have previously about we talked about that 8 o'clock, 8:30 phone call from Joseph to Jason's phone, the one that you saw, Joseph's name come up on Jason's phone.
Yes.
That was on February 4th, correct?
Yes.
Now, you were called to interview by Detective Gall back in June of 2011.
Yes.
And you recall what you told him? Do you recall if you told him about that phone call that you saw that Joseph called Jason's phone?
I don't remember.
Let's take a look at Detective Gall's report. Okay?
Okay.
Is that refresh your memory?
Yes.
So, did you tell Detective Gall about the phone call you saw Joseph calling Jason's phone?
Yes.
And did you tell Detective Gall what date you saw that on?
Yes.
What date did you tell him?
February 4th.
Did you give him a time?
I don't.
Refresh your recollection.
It says about 2,000 hours. I guess 20. What is that? Okay.
I also want to ask you about the type of truck that Chase had back in February of 2010. Remember what kind of truck it was?
Yes.
What kind?
It was a white kind of utility truck, not your average, kind of truck that you buy from a dealership. It had like a light at the top and side panels that you open up for tools and things.
After February of 2010, how long did Chase have that truck?
For probably another year.
What happened after that period of time for that truck?
It ended up getting repossessed.
Do you remember exactly when it got repossessed?
Not exactly, no.
Who arranged for the truck to get repossessed?
I arranged for the pickup of the truck
Why was that?
because the company that we bought it from was either wanted to get payment or they wanted the truck back, and since Chase couldn't make the payment, they wanted the truck back. So I arranged for them to come pick it up at the house.
So they did that?
Yes.
I just got a note from my partner there that you recall if you told Detective Gal a date, that was the day of the week that you said you saw the phone call from Joseph come in.
I don't recall if I told him the day of the week.
So I gotta walk back up there.
I'm sorry. It says Thursday, February 4th.
That's what you would have told Detective Gal.
If you wrote it in this report, I would assume so.
Memory as to when you would have told him, or what day of the week you told him.
Yes.
So that was Thursday.
Yes.
Now, we heard an audio recording this was a phone call between you and Chase. Do you recall listening to that?
Which phone call was it?
There was a phone call that counsel played, and the jury listened to it.
Okay, yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And this, by listening to that, were you able to determine approximately when that phone call took place?
Wait, is this the jailhouse call that we're talking about?
No, this is a phone call. You called Chase, or Chase called you, and you're having a phone call. I'll have you take a look at the transcript.
Okay, I'm not sure what phone call we're talking about. Okay, yes.
Actually, counsel had asked you questions about it before, and then today played it this morning.
Yes, okay.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know, like, in the time context when that would have been? Because you do refer to being interviewed by San Bernardino detectives the day before.
Okay, yeah. Well, it was prior to Chase being arrested. So it was probably sometime in October of 2014, I guess.
Okay. And she asked you some questions about Chase being reckless, and that he could end up dead. Questions and because people were pissed off with him. Everybody was pissed off with him. You remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
And you remember listening to you saying those words on that tape,
Yes.
on that audio.
Yes.
I'm going to have you take a look at, you can look at whatever you want on this transcript. I'm going to just direct you to pages 6 through 8. But if you want to look at anything else, feel free, okay, if you want to put it in context. And I'm going to ask you what you meant by some of those comments, okay?
Okay.
You see that?
Yeah.
So, some of the things that you said, you make a lot of people angry. That's part of the problem. So if somebody's going to point fingers, they're going to point them at you because you pissed everybody off at some point in time. Remember saying that?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, like I said, I was exaggerating, but for example, Chase was a hard worker and he expected that of the people who worked for him. A lot of times he would yell at employees if they didn't do things precisely his way. We had, we didn't keep employees for very long. And yeah, there were business transactions that some of them went south, and there was complaints filed, and he messed up occasionally.
You mess up on jobs?
As far as his work goes, not usually, but as far as, getting things done when he said he's going to get them done, or delivering them when he says he's going to deliver them, or just putting people off, or just not taking their calls, not responding to phone calls or questions or emails. Yeah, people would get upset.
Did Chase overpromise customers?
Occasionally, yes.
Did he want to please his customers?
It actually calls for speculation as to what this is.
sustained on that grounds in evidence code 352.
You worked with Chase in the water fountain business, correct?
Yes.
Did Chase sometimes overpromise what he could, or when he could deliver things to his customers?
Objection calls for hearsay.
Objection sustained is cumulative, she's already asked it, answered it.
When you said on the tape that, on the audio recording of this telephone conversation, that you couldn't take a chance with your family because you were too reckless. You recall saying that? What did you mean by that?
There were a lot of things that kind of led up to that. It was just, you know, an accumulation of frustration that I felt both in business and in personal life with Chase. He was a creative personality, which meant that he didn't always hold up the business end of things. He didn't always do things the proper way. He, you know, I don't know how to explain it any better. He's just, sometimes he felt like he could do anything. He felt like he could build anything, and he would promise people that he would, you know, do something, you know, incredible, and, you know, sometimes he fell short of that.
Did Chase really believe he could build those incredible things as he told people?
Objection calls for speculation.
You said Chase doesn't care much about anything or anyone.
Again,
that?
yes.
What did you mean by that?
Again, that was just my frustration, because I kept telling him, like, our relationship's going to suffer if you don't listen to me about things, if you don't do things this way, you know, the right way, if you don't conduct your business properly, like if you keep pissing off employees, if you keep pissing off customers, you're not going to keep a business. I was just trying to help him and help us, and it's like he just continued to do what he thought was best and didn't take, you know, my feedback into consideration.
He disagreed with you in that audio regarding the fact that he doesn't care about anything or anyone. He said in the interview that he said it's the freaking truth, and he said no, it's not. You recall hearing that?
Yes.
You followed that with you didn't care enough to keep your family together.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
Well, like I said, he didn't take my advice, and even though I warned him that, you know, he might lose us, he continued, you know, just doing things the way he wanted to do them.
Thank you.
Anything on way across?
Yes. During your interview in October that you were asked about, and the detectives were showing you phone records, do you recall that?
Yes.
And defense counsel went over some of those phone records with you?
Yes.
And do you recall telling the detectives after you looked at those phone records that you didn't trust your own memory?
They made me feel like I couldn't trust my own memory, yes.
Those were the words that you said after looking at those records, right?
Yes.
Because those records don't show a call at 8:28, right?
Correct.
And in fact, we looked at a call from around 9:30 that night that you made to him, and it lasted about somewhere between 2.5 to 3 minutes, right?
Okay, yes.
And you testified that you weren't with him when you made that call, right?
Correct.
And that was on February 4th. And you indicated, I believe, that he was somewhere on the property, but you didn't know where, right?
Correct.
But since you weren't with him, you can't actually tell us where he was, right?
Correct.
And do you remember talking to the detectives about the sleeping arrangements in your house at that time?
Yes.
And in fact, you and the defendant didn't share a bedroom together, did you?
No.
You slept on the sofa, right?
Yes.
And you testified about Joseph a little bit in the fact that you had interactions with him. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And Joseph was a pretty laid back guy, right?
Yes.
Kind of a surfer dude,
Yes.
very informal.
Yes.
And then you were also shown a series of checks that I want to ask you about. I think you were shown 420D, 420E, 420I, 420F, and 420H. Do you recall being asked about these particular checks?
Yes.
And you looked at those checks, and there were 3 checks in that series that were made out to the defendant, and the date on them is February 4th. Is that right?
Yes.
And do you happen to know when these checks were actually created?
No.
So, if there was testimony that was elicited during the trial that these checks were created after February 4th and then backdated to that date, did you know anything about that?
No.
Were you aware of any storage units that the defendant had?
At which,
So,
at which time
Were you aware of any storage units that Joseph and the defendant had together?
oh, no.
And were you aware of any storage units that the defendant had between like 2008 and 2010?
I can't think of any.
Okay. Now, you indicated that on the night of February 4th, the two of you had a disagreement, right?
Yes.
And that was over the phone call, right?
Yes.
And you indicated it only lasted for a few minutes.
Yes.
So was it something that spanned the entire night?
No.
Now, you also testified that the defendant left some messages for Joseph, right? When you couldn't get a hold of him after the court?
Yes.
How do you know that he left messages for him?
One he told me, I think I may have been present during him trying to call.
Okay, so you were present when he actually called Joseph's phone and left a message?
I can't remember specifically, but because he was still trying to get a hold of him in the evenings when he came home.
Would it be surprising to you to learn that in a review of Joseph's voicemails, there were no messages from the defendant?
objection, that's so misleading.
Yes.
Now, you also testified that the defendant opened a bank account at Union Bank, right? And that was because Joseph would transfer money to him, right?
It would be easier to transfer money, yes, instead of writing checks.
I'm going to have you just take a look at 882. And if you can look at the additions and show me if you see, or tell me if you see any transfers into that particular bank account.
Just go through all the transactions, or
Just the additions.
the highlighted ones?
If you look at the additions section
Sorry,
right
okay.
there, that's okay, it'll be the first page.
I'd object as the foundation, if you can identify a transfer.
Overruled, council approach for a moment. Okay, yes, you may continue.
You're familiar with some of the basic principles of bookkeeping, right?
Yes.
You did books for the defendant, right?
Yes.
And you have received bank statements before, right?
Yes.
And so are you familiar somewhat with what a transfer would look like?
Not really, because I never really had wire transfers.
You never had a wire transfer? Okay. Well, as you look at this, do you see anything that identifies a wire transfer?
Not a wire transfer, no.
Okay. And then moving on to, that was the month of January. Do you see any type of a wire transfer in the additions for the month of February?
No.
And in the month of March, do you see any wire transfers?
No.
And same thing for the month of April, do you see any wire transfers?
No.
And for the month of May, do you see any wire transfers?
No.
So it would be probably more common, would you agree, for the defendant to receive checks from Joseph?
Yes.
That should cause speculation.
Sustained, the last answer is stricken.
Well, you didn't, in the amount of records that we looked at, you didn't actually see any wire transfers, did you?
No.
In fact, you were asked specifically about the defendant not caring for anybody, right?
Yes.
And that included your whole family, right?
Do I believe he didn't care for us? No, but I did say it.
Did you believe that you were a priority for him?
I didn't feel like a priority, no.
And how about the kids? Did you feel like they were a priority for him?
No.
And you were asked about the provincial waterfall, and you testified actually that you had observed it while it was being created, is that right?
Yes.
But you didn't actually see it installed, right?
No.
So had you ever seen that picture before of the waterfall installed?
Before today?
Yes.
I think so. I think Chase may have showed it to me on the camera or something when he took the picture.
Is that anything that you went over when you were with Mr. Laney?
No.
And in fact, you were asked specifically about a lawsuit being filed on behalf of Joseph and with respect to that waterfall, right?
Yes.
And it was actually the defendant who reminded you about that when you were there during the visit, right?
No, it was when we were in LA, actually. He pointed out the restaurant and said that was the restaurant that they installed the waterfall, and Joseph was filing a lawsuit.
Okay, well, the defendant told you during that visit, he said, do you remember this waterfall? Yes, and Joseph got sick and he was doing a lawsuit against them. Do you remember him telling you that?
Yes, I guess.
Objection is the form of the question.
Overruled.
Is the question not telling?
Overruled.
And you indicated that with respect to the defendant's business relationships, there had been complaints filed, right?
Yes.
And stuff that went south, right?
Yes.
And were you aware, or do you recall getting a check made out to you from Geist Construction?
No, I don't recall that.
Would you deposit checks for the defendant frequently though when he didn't have a bank account?
Objection, I believe, to asking that.
Overruled. It's foundational.
It's possible, yes.
Would you also cash those checks for him?
Yes, probably.
And would you agree that in 2009 and 2010, up to the point where Joseph went missing, that the work that the defendant was doing for Earth Inspired Products was the main source of his income?
It was a good portion of his income, at least half, if not possibly 3/4.
So you're saying that you recall him doing other jobs and receiving other payments?
Yes.
And do you recall who those were for?
Offhand, no. He did some work for Aragon that didn't have to do with waterfalls also. So,
Was that prior to going to Metro Sheet Metal?
yes.
So that would have been mid-2009?
Yes.
Would you agree that if there had been any severance of the relationship between Joseph McStay and the defendant, that it would have had a significant financial impact on the family?
Yes.
You were served a subpoena by the DA's office in this case. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you actually called me when you got it. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you and I had a conversation.
Objection, Howard.
Overruled. It sounds like it's foundational.
You called me when you got the subpoena so that you could be placed on call. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And during that conversation, I gave you the opportunity to review your reports, right? I told you that if you needed to, you could review your reports.
Yes.
And you told me you didn't need to do that, right?
I don't know if I told you I didn't need to do that, but I remember you offering.
And in fact, you actually reviewed all of those with Mr. Moline, right?
The audio and video stuff, yes.
And in fact, you were asked whether or not the defendant asked you to lie. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And in fact, he didn't ask you to lie. He told you what you needed to remember, right?
Objection, argumentative.
Overruled.
He told me to tell the truth.
Where in this transcript, ma'am, where in this transcript, which deals with the visit with the defendant, tell me where it says for you to tell the truth.
Well, I don't see it at the moment, but
You had an opportunity to review the transcript.
quickly, yes.
And what you repeatedly see in there is, we need you to remember it, we need you to remember it, you remember this, you remember this waterfall.
This date's the fall.
The objection sustained is true, was listened to the entire recording of
Ms. Jarvis, are you familiar with the term confirmation bias?
No,
Do you know what that means?
not exactly, no.
Think further.
Let's see the transcript. Okay, so she didn't show you the original, but what was the, what was it, a jail visit or a, okay, the visit. How many visits would you say you had with Chase over the 4.5 years you've been in jail?
A lot.
At least once a week or? Once a month?
Yeah, I'm trying to go once a week.
And what about telephone calls? How many did you say?
Telephone calls not as often, but a dozen maybe.
Is that one of the frequent things he tells you? To always tell the
Objection
truth?
leading.
Does he tell you to tell the truth?
Yes.
Did he ask you to lie?
No.
Any objection to Ms. Jarvis being excused subject to recall? All right, thank you for your attendance. You're excused. I guess they know where to find you if we need anything additional from you. Okay. It's about 4 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and take our evening recess today. Monday, apparently there's a scheduling problem with some witnesses, so it looks like we're not going to be in session Monday morning. Is that right? Okay, yes, Mr. McGee indicated that a little bit earlier. So we will resume on Monday at 1:30 in the afternoon. Again, keep in mind the admonitions, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case, and we'll see everyone back Monday at 1:30.